people need room to be creative and be themselves. And I just want parents to encourage that. Who knows what it will lead to, but it doesn't need to lead to anything if it feeds your soul. And, you mentioned the principles of positive psychology, right? Like the most authentically happy people in the world are the ones who tap into one of their signature strengths in service to other people.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. Here on the podcast, I share my experiences raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 16 to 26 and working with thousands more as a summer camp director over the past 3 decades. I'm the author of Happy Campers, and I frequently do workshops with parents, teachers, and summer camp professionals about social skills, connection, and happiness, topics I researched extensively for my master's in psychology. If you want tools for raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults, you've come to the right place. Dr. Christopher Thurber is a legend in the camp industry. I've had the pleasure of learning from him at his conference sessions and in his articles for Camping Magazine over the past 3 decades. Chris is a board-certified clinical psychologist who serves during the school year as the school psychologist and instructor at Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. Chris has written numerous book chapters and scholarly articles on leadership, homesickness, and youth development. He's an award-winning contributor to Camping Magazine and Camp Business. He's also shared his opinions and expertise on national and international radio, television, print media, podcasts, and webinars, including The Today Show, Martha Stewart, and CNN. And today, it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Chris Thurber to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on here. Now, I know some of my listeners are camp professionals and are very familiar with your work, but some of my listeners are parents who may not really know who you are and what you do. So can you just give a little bit of an introduction of who you are?
Sure. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I work at Phillips Exeter Academy, which is an independent high school in New Hampshire on the seacoast. I became interested in psychology as an undergraduate, mostly studying language development. And I still love language. I love to write. I write for Camping Magazine and Camp Business. And I have 2 boys who are 15 and 17. My wife is a chemist and a musician. And I am also a camp professional. So I enjoy visiting camps in the late spring, early summer to provide in-person, on-site staff training workshops. And I've developed some homesickness prevention tools that are on a website called prepforcamp.com. And the 4 is the number 4. So prepforcamp.com.
And you also have this huge library of online video trainings called Expert Online Training that many camps use to kind of bring you and other professionals to their staff, even to small staffs and that kind of thing. How long has that been around now? I don't even remember when it started.
So Expert Online Training got started in 2007. So 12 years, and we have 27 faculty, as you said, different areas of expertise, physicians, attorneys, teachers, camp directors, psychologists, and more than 150 8 to 15-minute videos that cover a circumscribed topic, and each have a quiz and a handout, but are designed to complement the on-site training that all camps provide. But we just know that nobody has enough time with their staff on site to provide training in all of the aspects with which they want their staff to operate competently. So that's the niche that Expert Online Training fills.
And I think, funny, because I mean, I've learned so much from your videos and going to your live sessions at conferences over the year.
Thank
And
you.
so many of them are applicable to parents too. I'm sure you found this, whether you're at school or at home or at camp, some of the same concepts work. So like, I still think of your Tic-Tac.
Oh, right. Yeah. And
the lowest, I put that in my book, actually, that
yes,
what's the,
I was so happy to read that.
So what's the, like, when you're thinking about how you respond to a child, to think in the phrase of what's like the least expenditure of energy that I can put out to respond in this situation. Whereas, you think of the person exploding and yelling and, oh my gosh, their blood pressure just shot through the roof because the kid spilled something or whatever,
right.
Versus, you could like point to the paper towels and not say anything,
right?
Or, you know, just like, so that's really like, that's one of the ones, I mean, I've watched them all many times, with our staff and before, but that's really, that's again, like these little things that, people who didn't grow up working at camp don't know. And this is, I'm sure you've found this too, that when you're a camp counselor and you've worked with all these kids and you've worked with different ages and all this stuff, you learned so many things just about communication and what kids need. And most parents don't even have any of that.
Yeah.
So it's,
I mean, I told you this, the reason I think Happy Campers is a brilliant book is you've taken the lessons that we get to practice in a very intense way as camp professionals for, 7, 8, 9 weeks with constant feedback about whether it works or not. And I don't mean that kids are filling out questionnaires. I mean, they're either listening or they're not, or they're being compliant or they're not. And I think that as a parent myself, when my first son was born, I thought, I'm going to be really good at this once he turns 8. Because, but younger than that, I really don't have any experience. But to your point, it's a wonderful laboratory and classroom for parenting. And I loved that you extracted so many practical tips and strategies and a mindset that is, it's already helping so many parents, and it's going to help many more. And it's a book that you can go back to and look at, okay, what was the thing about, the way you have it organized with some lists and some summaries, I think is really, really good. But we have an untapped resource in a sense at camp. Everyone who is lucky enough to be a staff member at a camp, I think is going to be that much better as a parent. But the rest of the world can benefit from what, we've understood about child development and behavior management and leadership and supervision and physical and emotional safety. So thank you for writing it.
Well, thanks for reading it and writing a little review. I appreciate that. But I've always said everybody should be a camp counselor at least once, because just one summer of, working at camp, getting some of the training that you get is so helpful. I think it would just save a lot of heartache later on for people just to have that, I know we can't require that, but if you and I ran the world, everybody would be a camp counselor at least.
And I think that, the companion book that you should write to Happy Campers would be, Happy CEOs or something, because all of these things that you just mentioned are as applicable to the boardroom or, the cubicle farm as the family. So it's on leadership and, again, behavior management, supervision. We keep coming back to these transcendent phenomena like respect and listening more than you talk and working hard to understand another person's perspective and recognizing that all behavior makes sense to the actor and not burning yourself out by trying to think, well, what is the least amount of energy I could expend in this situation that is, pretty mundane. Those are important. I mean, and look, I'm sure that there are other jobs that imbue people with tremendous, skills and lessons that they can use. I worked the one summer I wasn't back at Camp Belknap at a fish market in South Portland, Maine, where I grew up. And I learned a lot about business. And how to shuck lobsters and learned that I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. But every experience is an opportunity. But to be, as you said, to be a camp counselor for at least one summer and have, whether it's a day camp or an overnight camp, direct responsibility for, 6, 8, 10, 12 kids, which is bigger than the average family. And you've got to be, positive and energetic and on top of the fun and the safety and the planning. And wow, just one summer is going to give you a whole toolbox of things that you can use all over the place, including as a parent.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the American Camp Association is doing a good job about trying to provide information to people about the value of working at camp, because everyone always talks about internships and they want to be in finance and they want to do this. But even if you work in finance, if you're going to have a family and maybe a spouse and some kids, these relational skills, these leadership skills, communication, so important.
Yeah.
So Chris, I want to just pick your brain since I have you here and we're speaking kind of to an audience of just people who care about basically raising kids who become thriving adults. And you're really on the front lines because you are working with kids all year and you're also working with the people who work with kids. So I feel like you have a really good handle on what's going on with kids. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing that are kind of making it harder to be, an adolescent, a kid these days?
One of the trends is, and I'm immersed in this right now because early action, early decision, college and university announcements came out this week, or some last week, some early this week. One of the trends is that education is more competitive than ever. And paradoxically, we feel good about having a higher percentage of adolescents graduate from high school worldwide than ever before. That's a milestone about which we should be enormously proud. And that also means that each college or university, again, around the world, not just in the US, is getting many more applications each year. And it's backfiring a bit. I'm not exactly sure what the answer is, but when I say backfiring, instead of having high school graduates who are excited about going to college or university, they're starting to feel pressure even in elementary school or early middle school to set themselves apart from the crowd, to develop a unique talent, to begin preparing their resume for college. And just to give you an example, and some of your listeners, what this landscape looks like, I was yesterday at a presentation by the college counseling office here at Phillips Exeter Academy, and she gave us a statistic that was representative of colleges and universities in the United States. Northeastern University, which many people have heard of and is one of 3 universities in the United States that has a co-op program, meaning part of your college credit is a semester or 2 of work, and learning from that, had, for students applying to Northeastern from Phillips Exeter Academy, about a 75% acceptance rate. So that's not the acceptance rate of Northeastern, but at a good high school like Phillips Exeter, in 2010, if you were applying, or 2009, if you were applying to Northeastern, 75% of those kids were getting in. So, strong students, academically strong, good grades, solid extracurriculars, had a really good chance of going to a top-notch university like Northeastern. Last year, same number of students from Phillips Exeter applied, and just 30% got in. And what my colleague was saying is that's the trend nationally and internationally. So why care about this? Well, it's creating a tremendous amount of pressure for adolescents, and that's a problem. They're more anxious, more depressed, and so it's taking an emotional toll. Also, we're not thinking creatively as adults about education broadly construed. You don't necessarily need a college degree. Back in the day, I guess, by which I mean it still happens today, but was much more prevalent, say, in the I guess beginning in the Renaissance, but through the 1800s, apprenticeships, right? And apprenticeship is the model we use at summer camp so much. We have younger leaders apprenticing with older leaders, or younger counselors with older counselors. So you're learning on the job. We should be applying that to more things. Like, it's awesome if you go get a bachelor's degree in English literature or physics or computer, science, but not everyone wants that, needs that, or has that as a career path. And I think we've a little bit as a society fallen victim to the perceived prestige of a college or university degree, and completely overlooked expanded opportunities for vocational training and apprenticeships. And, so you got me going there, Audrey. But
I wonder too, like, to me, and I mean, obviously you probably feel the same way, that, that what makes a thriving adult is not a test score or even a degree from a particular place.
Right.
It's, these character traits and these interpersonal skills and this emotional depth and all these things that actually can be counter to when we're so focused on these specific metrics. Right. It's funny because my daughter went to a competitive school. I mean, you're like in the thick of it. I mean, you're at a place where, a lot of places, like a normal public high school in the middle of the city, they are not worrying about Northeastern. They're barely, a lot of them are hopefully graduating. So it's like, it is different when you're looking at these kids whose parents probably went to, good schools and are thinking, oh my gosh, my kid needs to go to XYZ or whatever. But so my daughter, she was by the end of her high school career, which was also at a high school that was very much, interested in the kids, kind of making them look good too. Like, it was sort of weird. It was not about, what's going to make you really thrive? What kind of environment? Yeah. It was never, did anyone ask? And of course I'm telling her because her older sisters didn't go to the same school, and they were very much like, they just did their own college applications. It was a very low key process. She was my first kid. She's my third. And she was the first one to be at a place where it was like the metrics and the dots and the, really crazy. In the spring of her senior year, she gave a talk. They have these things called Tuesday Talks. And her whole talk was based on David Brooks' thing about how we should be building our eulogies, not our resumes. About how, when you really think about it, what do you want to be building and growing in yourself and in the kids you work with? And you want people who are going to be great friends, who are going to stop and help someone who needs help. And when you're so busy, like clawing your way, to some such and such thing, you make decisions, and sometimes you're not your best self, really. I mean, obviously the extreme example is these parents who thinking they were doing something really good for their kids, in paying for things, because it is so hard now. And, even these super bright kids don't get into these places. And we all know this. But to tell the kid that, or the family that their kid is the one that's not going to get in. Yeah. So what's the antidote? You're in the thick of it. What do you find yourself? Do you talk to parents quite a bit? Like when you're talking to the kids, and what are you advising parents of how they can kind of counter this, at least in their own families and with their kids, so the kids don't feel so anxious and scared about college and that kind of thing?
I think I recommend a variety of different things. Yeah, I do get a chance to talk to parents, not perhaps as much as I would like. And it's great that you're doing this podcast, because you'll reach some interested parents who are, especially invested in the job that they're doing. Well, not surprisingly, I recommend camp because it is the ideal complement to a traditional or non-traditional classroom setting. You take kids from being mostly inside and bring them outside. You take kids from mostly sitting to mostly running around. You take kids from doing things that are, as you said, have a lot of numbers and quantitative marks associated with them, and put them in some less structured, less evaluative circumstances. It's a way of stretching your brain and building resilience that will not only relieve stress and boost your mood, but also make you more resilient to, future challenges. So camp is not the panacea, but it's a huge part of, I think, robust, youth development. Another thing that I recommend to parents is to ask better questions. Students here, like students at a lot of schools, maybe every school, are really sick of parents asking, what were your grades? Or if we want to steer clear of, performance markers, what'd you do today? How was school? I mean, and those are well-intentioned questions. They're benign, but they're not nurturing a relationship. And, I don't want people to think too ultra seriously about, the relationship they have with their kid, but come up with some questions that are open-ended and probe other aspects of, the kid's life besides their performance in, sports or academics. I actually am really inspired by a lot of the students with whom I get a chance to speak. As I said, I work as a clinician. I also teach a psychology class, and it's just, there are many students here with wonderful relationships with their parents. And I think a big key to that is taking an interest in your child as a person, and how are they unique and how are they evolving and developing, rather than continuing to try to fit them into some mold. So if that sounded very abstract, I'll give you a concrete example. I think I mentioned my boys are 15 and 17, and they're students here because they can go for free. Otherwise, we couldn't afford it. But it's a great benefit of working here. And, of course, we've encouraged them to work hard in their classes, and, they love music and they play the violin, and that's all been awesome and also fairly traditional. My younger son, Sava, has, from the time he was 4 or 5, and I think could understand what a joke was, sort of leading someone down a story that has a surprising ending, a punchline or a riddle that, has a pun or something. And we just always thought, well, this, that's Sava. Like, he loves, when he's online, he's not playing video games. He's looking at memes, and he's in the other room just cracking himself up. So, okay. He came home halfway through the fall term, and he's a sophomore. And he said, guess what I did today? And I said, tell me. And he said, I joined the Exeter Comedy Club. And I said, oh, no, I got to get this right, because this actually is important. It's the Standup Comedy Club, because they love saying that their acronym is SUCC, SUCC. But I said, that's awesome. So what are you going to do? And he said, well, we have a couple of weeks to prepare a stand-up routine, and then we're going to perform it. And I looked over at my wife, and I thought she was going to faint, because, I don't know, we thought it was bold. Because, Sava likes jokes, but there's a big difference between liking jokes and being a stand-up comic, or being any good at stand-up comedy. And he practiced and practiced and practiced and crushed it. He was so funny. And I'm not just saying that because he was my kid. Other people were laughing too. And so were the other kids. And that's something that I recommend to parents is, sometimes the best kind of parenting is get out of the way. And to put a very fine point on it, I remember my wife saying, I can throw her under the bus, right? Because she's not going to listen to this. Is that okay? You're going to send her. I don't know.
If you don't tell her about it, she won't hear it.
I hope she listens to it. But no, she said something like she was still in sort of evaluative mode, and said, Sava, have you thought about what might happen if you get up there and nobody thinks your jokes are funny? And that's when, now we're making eye contact again, and Sava's turned away from me, and I'm frowning at her, like, what are you doing? But we are definitely the kind of family that openly negotiates. And so Simo and I then have this conversation in front of our kid, talking about, having more of a growth mindset, and he can, all of this stuff. And Simo, being a chemist, kind of rolls her eyes and be like, okay, more psychological mumbo jumbo, but she does it. She just doesn't like that people name it or label it. Anyway, I just, kids need, people need room to be creative and be themselves. And I just want parents to encourage that. It's, who knows what it will lead to, but it doesn't need to lead to anything if it feeds your soul. And, you mentioned the principles of positive psychology, right? Like the most authentically happy people in the world are the ones who tap into one of their signature strengths in service to other people. That's exactly what Sava was doing. He was just on cloud nine practicing for 2 weeks, and then loved being up in front of the audience, and like, that's his deal. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I love that. Get out of the way. That reminds me of one of my friends, or my daughter's friend's older brother. The family was like, the dad was in finance. They all went to like this really, like business degrees and everything. And the son was really into music, and he was like, I'm going to work in the music industry. And the parents are just like really? Well,
but what about banking?
He wrote the song "Shut Up and Dance" and many others.
Wow.
So as it turns out, it's like another example of that. Like, I mean, to have a kid who like, what if he's on Saturday Night Live? Like, I'm listening to you talk. I'm like, oh my gosh, that would be the coolest thing ever, to have someone in your family that's making people laugh or whatever. But it's so true. It is sometimes just, we sometimes, I think, and I don't know that all parents do this, but when you don't have a lot of things going on for yourself that you're really excited about, sometimes you put a lot on your kids. Like, they're supposed to do all these great things because, you haven't had time to pursue your hobbies because you've been so focused on them. I think there's a lot of value in adults and parents showing kids what it's like to tap into those things, even if it's different. It's different for everybody, but if they see you doing something you enjoy, they learn, adults do things they enjoy, and they looks like they're having fun, and they meet other friends that way. So that modeling, I think, is really important too for parents to show kids that. But I love that. Get out of the way. It's really good. And the other thing is, you don't have to be perfect. Like, sometimes you say, kind of something that maybe isn't super encouraging. It's okay. Like, kids are resilient. It's just later you come back and go, oh, sorry I said that. I would be frightened, and I know that I couldn't do a stand-up routine. So I would have been like, that terrifies me. But it is crazy when kids are thinking of things that are flow for them or speaking to their strengths. Sometimes they are a lot more brave than you would be. Like, they're doing something and you're like, oh yeah, really? And they're like, oh yeah, no problem. You're like, oh gosh, to me, that would really be a problem. Yeah.
Well, you just mentioned another thing that I recommend to parents, and that is that you model this kind of humility and are able to kind of show your kids, not tell them how to live. So kind of show them what it is to, kind of balance work and play and sleep and get a little exercise, and model what it's like to bounce back from a failure. And in real time, if you say something that, you realize, oh no, that either didn't have the effect I intended or was the wrong thing to say, don't move on and pretend like nobody heard it. Talk about it, fix it. And sometimes, if you're enraged, that's not the time to debrief it, but you can always circle back. And, there were plenty of times with my own kids where I said, like, Tata, they call me Tata. Tata, my wife is from Serbia, so that's daddy. And I'll say to them, like, wow, Tata really lost it. I kind of lost my junk there. And they're like, yeah, that was hardcore. And we can have a sense of humor about it. And I can also talk to them about what set me off, what were the feelings. It puts you in a vulnerable spot, especially to talk with your kids about what your vulnerabilities are. But it's such an important thing to be able to do. And as you pointed out, for well-intentioned parents who make missteps, which is daily for parents, you shouldn't view your kids as fragile. They can bounce back from something you said or didn't say or forgot, or they need to see you trying hard. They need to see you learning from mistakes. But sometimes if I'm at a gathering or party or something, mostly of people I don't know because I'm going with SEMO with my wife or whatever it is, and people are being polite, like, oh, what do you do? And I say, I'm a psychologist. And they say, oh, boy, yeah, I better watch what I'm saying. You're probably analyzing me, to which I have the, clever retort, well, not unless you're paying me, but it's actually, I do think that reveals an anxiety that the general public has about, feelings and insights, and what if somebody else knew how you felt? And, boys, especially because of the way still they're socialized. And I'm speaking broadly here, but I'll give all your listeners the 50-cent word for the podcast, which is alexithymic, which is a fancy way of saying you don't have the words to describe how you feel. And this happens to boys more than girls, because boys don't get talked to by their moms or dads about emotions as much as girls do. And, I think with Bill Pollack's book, Real Boys, which you and I both read, it's, started to change 30 years ago, but it hasn't changed enough. And, classic example that I heard Michael Thompson give was, he was shopping in a grocery store, and there was a, classic grocery store parent thing, like kid just losing it in the cereal aisle, like, I gotta have the Lucky Charms. No, you can't have it. The knockdown, drag out temper tantrum. So there's this kid, 5, 6 years old, who's just losing it, and the parent losing it with them. And he said, well, at the beginning of the aisle, as I'm approaching, there's this dad and his daughter, totally silent, just like, okay, we got to steer around this train wreck. And he gets to the other end of the aisle, and there's a mom with her daughter, and the mom is paused there, at a polite distance from this temper tantrum that was happening, and turns to her daughter and says, what do you think is going on there? How do you think that girl feels right now? I wonder if the mom feels frustrated. You sometimes ask me for things that I say no to. How does that make you feel? So it's, it's giving some vocabulary. It's, sort of informally quizzing your kids about, thoughts and feelings. And it's another thing that I recommend parents do, in a developmentally appropriate way. But if you have sons, make sure you do it with them as well.
Mm. Oh my gosh, there's so much stuff, and I could talk to you for hours, because you just keep going
on.
We're
gonna.
But let's circle back.
You'd invite me back, so that's great.
We'll have to just do this again. But I want to circle back to your first example. So let's just say, okay, you're the parent. Your kid gets the bad news. They didn't get into the school. So what do? Like you may be in this position next year or something. What is it that parents can say or do to just maybe try to alleviate some of that pressure that kids are feeling?
The first thing would be to provide some empathy. And, empathy is not agreement. So your kid has some sort of hyperbolic reaction, like, I didn't get in early to Northeastern. I'm not going to get in regular decision either. No place is going to accept me. I'm going to end up, on the street corner, I don't know what, begging for money or something, So they have an extreme reaction. And the temptation as a parent is to minimize or dismiss, be like, Audrey, don't say that. That's not true. You're really smart, and you're going to get in somewhere. And you think you're doing a good job as a parent, but you go back and replay the tape. Your kid is telling you they're in distress. Sure, they're exaggerating, but we all exaggerate. And your response was to tell them they're being silly, to dismissive.
Yeah. Dismissing their real feelings.
An empathic response, even to something really exaggerated, would sound like, Audrey, I can tell that you're really disappointed, and it's not the news you wanted to hear. And it's devastating. You're really looking forward to it. And some of your friends got in early and you didn't. And that is also hard. I'm sure there's part of you that feels jealous, maybe part of you that feels angry at this admissions committee that didn't recognize what is awesome about you. And it's terrible news. Full stop. Besides avoiding the sort of dismissive contradiction trap that we want to say to our kids, like, no, wrong feeling, bad, don't feel. A more mature kid would feel this way, provide the empathy, but please, when you get to the end of your empathic statements, full stop, let it sink in. Let your kid respond. Let them just process the fact that you acknowledged some of the dimensions of their emotional experience. We're all tempted to immediately follow our empathic statement with problem solving, and look, we're parents. We've had more time on the planet than our kids, but when someone is in distress, whether it's they didn't like the news they heard from a college or the grade they got on a test or the fact that, their significant other just broke up with them by text message or whatever it might be, they don't want to hear the solution right now. Mm-mm. And they probably know what the solution is anyway. Like the kid who doesn't get into school early decision, in December knows that the next step is to work on the regular decision apps and finish the supplements and get it all in by January 1st. They don't need you to say that. So when you get to the empathic statement, just full stop and let them think about it. Let them respond. I promise that if your kids want your help, they'll ask for it. So you don't have to just go into auto problem solving modes.
Oh my gosh, that was so good. Your early state when you said we need to we're going to have to sell that recording, that little piece. Parents can just keep playing it over and practice for their kids because it was so good. I felt really good. I was feeling good about the rejection that I just got because you aimed it at me. So it was so good. Chris, this has been so much fun. What's the best place where people can find you and all your work? I'll put links in the show notes as well. But what's your main handle?
So my main handle is drchristhurber.com, where doctor is just DR. So drchristhurber.com. I've got all my articles and things up there for people to look at if they want, download for free. And I'll also say that there's some fun sort of swag that's for sale on the website. All of the proceeds go to camper scholarships. So there are a lot of young people whose parents can't afford the full nut or maybe any of it. And last year we raised about $1,500, and that's enough to send, one kid to camp for a couple of weeks. So I encourage people to, visit drchristhurber.com.
Awesome. That's fun. And then you have all your offshoot things. You have so many different websites and things going on. And next time I have you talk about your thing that in the camp world you were originally known for to me, which is homesickness. So we'll do that next time because I know a lot of parents will appreciate your wisdom on that topic as well. So thanks so much for being on the podcast today, Chris. It's been great talking to you.
My pleasure.
Every time I go to one of Chris's trainings at a conference, I leave feeling invigorated and inspired. And I feel the same way after our conversation today. I look forward to having Chris back on later this spring to talk about his expertise in helping parents navigate how to prevent homesickness in their kids when they go to summer camp. As always, you can find notes, links, and other resources related to today's conversation by visiting my website at sunshine-parenting.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for my email list so that you don't miss out on any of the great resources I have available for raising thriving kids. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate you sharing it with a friend. Please take a moment to give Sunshine Parenting a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Let's end with a quote from my book, Happy Campers. Positive relationships are what make a happy life. So let's help our kids build the social skills they need now to have strong friendships and positive relationships throughout their lives. I'm Audrey Monkey. Thank you for joining me for the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. Join me again next week.